All right, everyone, thank you so much for coming today. My name is Evgeny Ternovsky. With me is Raul Bagaria. We're both program managers on the Application Insights team. And as we're finishing up dealing with some PowerPoint issues here, today we'll be talking to you about Application Insights. For those of you who have used it before, we'll be giving you an update on new features. For those of you who are new, we'll also be introducing the tool to you and taking you through the most common scenarios. So let me get a bit of a read on the room while we're just getting the rest of it set up here. How many of you do use Application Insights today already? OK, the majority of you, good. And for those of you who don't, how many of you deal or sometimes interact with the application tier within your jobs as opposed to maybe infrastructure? OK, so everyone in here, in one way or another, needs to monitor their applications, needs to make sure that everything is up and running, is performant, and is ready to go. How are we doing there, Raul?
Just one more minute. Sorry, guys.
Sorry, guys. Technology strikes as it sometimes does. So let me talk you a little bit through what Application Insights is, just as we're finishing this.
OK, we are done. We are go.
Yeah?
Awesome.
OK. Sorry, guys. Do you want to take over?
Yeah. Hey, guys. So as Evgeny mentioned, so we are talking about monitoring. And in the cloud era, there are various challenges that you need to be aware of. So depending on whether you are in the development or QA or DevOps, or even you are managing your application infrastructure, as well as at a leadership level, you want to get that entire unified view of your application, business KPIs, revenue, cost management, or even whether your application is secure, are there any threats, and so on. So across this entire gamut of challenges or requirements, we intend to provide you all the solutions available within Azure Monitoring and Analytics that can help you achieve each of these goals. So you can detect and debug errors. You can make your applications faster. You can get an end-to-end view across your apps and infrastructure, even track your business KPIs and SLAs, increase user engagement, and figure out whether your applications are meeting all your security bars. So the agenda for today would be, we want to go through a typical experience for a modern application stack on how you can, as quickly as possible, identify and fix any problems in your applications, be it performance problems or your application crashes and failures. We also want to identify any integration opportunities that you guys can take advantage of if you're already using any DevOps tools or workflows, or you have already invested in Azure or Microsoft ecosystem. We'll also touch base on all the new capabilities and announcements that we have done at Ignite, as well as take you through a brief overview of where we are going next, what's the roadmap looking like. And of course, there'll be lots of demos. This is a demo-heavy session, so enjoy. OK, so when I talk about Azure Monitoring and Analytics, the idea is not just monitoring your apps in isolation or monitoring your IT infrastructure in isolation or just taking care of your SQL or storage metrics. You want a full stack hybrid IT monitoring solution. In a typical modern application, you do have all these stacks that I have presented on the left. You have your cloud OS, VMs running on it. You have probably containers where your apps are deployed or workloads are running, and that end user who is using your application. Now, it does not matter whether your application is on the cloud, as I've mentioned here, or it's even on-prem or any cloud provider out there. As long as your application can send data to Azure Monitoring, you can get the value that we are talking about here. You can get all your Azure resource telemetry, your compute OS infrastructure telemetry, all your application performance telemetry, as well as your real user data around usage, page performance, errors, and so on. Now, to address this full stack telemetry, we have an entire suite of solutions around Azure Monitoring and Analytics available in Azure today. So for your application monitoring, we have Application Insights, where you can deep dive into these metrics. If you want to look at infrastructure at a deep dive level, we have network monitoring, container monitoring solutions, service map solutions, and even a full new big data analytics engine that we call Log Analytics. At the platform level, in case you are using Azure IaaS, SaaS, or PaaS services, all the metrics that natively come to you from these resources are available to you in Azure Monitor. You get recommendations from Advisor. You get integrations with Azure Health, as well as Security Center that I talked about. Now, one thing to understand here, all of these services do not work in isolation. Of course, you can use one of these services or the other as per your requirements. If you are already invested with some of our partners, like, say, Splunk or New Relic or AppDynamics, we do not ask you to completely move on to this entire stack. But you pick and choose whichever service you want to use here. But the benefit you get is all of these do correlate at one level or another. So you can basically figure out if your application is slow, is it due to your application failure or something going bad in the network, or even due to a noisy neighbor in the VM that your app is deployed onto. So that's the entire benefit that we are talking about here. And the session today, we will deep dive into Application Insights, which is our application performance monitoring tool. How many of you guys have already used Application Insights so far? I'm sure Evgeny asked that, but great. So what we'll do today is, for those of you who have already used it, we'll just take the others through a brief overview of what Application Insights is, and then we'll jump onto some core deep dive scenarios and touch base on the new announcements that we have been making. So Application Insights is a performance monitoring and diagnostics tool, which gives you a bunch of scenarios that you might be facing in your day-to-day role, whether maintaining applications or making applications faster, or as part of program management or product management, figuring out who your users are, how you can get them more engaged. So the scenarios I talk about here below. So there is health check. You want to figure out whether your application is available and healthy, and that too globally. How quickly you can figure that out in real time. Once you do that, how you can identify opportunities to optimize the performance of your application. Maybe there are some slow operations. Maybe there are some dependencies that are not working as appropriate. How can you identify the bottlenecks and make that as fast as possible? There is a scenario around debugging as well. There might be failures in your backend code. There might be dependencies failing. There might be failures on the front end. Maybe some browser code is crashing. How can you identify these failures and use our debugging technologies? If you have used Visual Studio Debugger, we have brought that on the cloud. How you can use that debugger to debug your production applications, go to local variables, and identify what went wrong. We also have a big data analytics engine built right within Application Insights, which has a bunch of machine learning proprietary querying technologies that can help you do pattern recognition, data mining, root cause analysis, basically giving you all the power to work with your data and get the insights that you need. Once you have gone through a typical performance optimization debugging scenario, you know more about your data. You know what your thresholds are. You would want to generate some alerts so that if you face that scenario in future, you can be alerted on top of that. We are providing you both analytics, query-based alerts, as well as metric-based alerts. And you can even set up automated actions on top of that. Maybe based on an application metric, you would want to auto-scale your app service instance or descale that. All of these automated actions can help make your life easier. On customer insights, while we are talking about engineering teams, it's not just developers and ops and DevOps. There are also like your entire team, including product managers and program managers, who care about how to increase user retention, user engagement, which pages are more popular, how you can optimize your entire user journey or user flow through the application. So these kinds of customer insights, business insights that can help you succeed are all part of the application performance monitoring suite. And that's not all. We understand that while we are providing you all of these great tools and features within the product, there are scenarios where you want to take the data out, where you want to correlate with your other data sources, other products that you are using, let's say Power BI or Operations Management Suite, or you want to do your own processing through Stream Analytics. All of these correlation capabilities are available to you in as flexible a format as you want. So talking about the ecosystem, Application Insights has a three-phase process. You ingest the data from wherever your application lies. Once that data is in, you can explore the data in the various tools and portals that we provide. and then take the data out in whatever format you need to work on it next. So let's look at the various components that might make the things clearer. Now, getting data into Application Insights, it's extremely easy. If you are using Visual Studio, it's built into the IDE. You open your project, right-click in Solution Explorer, add Application Insights, and done. No need to write a single line of code to start collecting telemetry. Even then, we provide you a full API layer with which you can send any custom events, custom metrics, custom logs, and so on. If you do not want to add the SDK, do not want to redeploy your application, we have a configuration tool called Status Monitor that you can install on your IIS server. It picks up all the applications running there. You can pick and choose which ones you want to instrument. It will add the package, it will add the config file, and start collecting basic telemetry. There are also Azure extensions. If you're using, for example, Azure App Service, you can just enable the extension from the portal and get going. We also understand, like I was talking to customers in the expo hall a couple of days back, there are many customers among yourselves who are using System Center Operations Manager today to monitor their hybrid environments. Now, there is a management pack available with which, without doing anything else, you can just connect your SCOM data and directly pull that in Application Insights for more richer analytics and monitoring. There is also a new connection that we have announced with Mobile Center for all of your iOS and Android application querying and usage analytics. As well as there is an open schema. So not only the data that we collect with App Insights, any data sets, any databases that you have, maybe a CRM database or some lookup table that you want to correlate with your application telemetry, you can just upload that data and start querying across these different data sets. Now, once all of this data is available with us on the portal, we have a bunch of machine learning heuristics and algorithms running on top of that that can help you detect proactively if something anomalous or something weird is going to go on. So you can identify before it impacts your customers. Once you are there on the portal, we are very well integrated with the platform monitoring solution, that's Azure Monitor. So in one unified overview, you can get your application alerts, your infrastructure alerts, your platform telemetry, everything together. And then within Application Insights, we have a bunch of state-of-the-art tools like Application Map, which gives you that entire topology view of your application without you needing to configure anything. There is a real-time KPI view available with Live Metric Stream that we'll just show you in a few moments. And then there are these profiler and debugger tools that we announced at the Build conference earlier this year that takes the power of Visual Studio Debugger and Visual Studio Profiler directly to the cloud and enable you to profile and debug your in-production cloud applications. That's not all. Your production telemetry is even available within Visual Studio IDE. So as a developer, you do not need to go out of the IDE. You just get all your production telemetry right on top of your methods as part of CodeLens integration that we'll just see again in a few moments. Once you have played with the data on the portal, you might want to export it further that we talked about. So there is a connector available with OMS, that's Operations Management Suite, or if you might know about it as Log Analytics or Azure Management and Security. So you can send your application telemetry out there and correlate your app and infra telemetry together. You can export your data to Power BI. You can put it in a blob storage as a continuous export and run stream analytics on top of that. There are REST APIs with which you can query data, metrics, and logs. There is the Microsoft Flow and Logic Apps integration, where you can automate your reporting, processing, or like taking actions on top of your alerts and metrics. And when I talked about our DevOps workflow, if you are using Visual Studio Team Services or GitHub to manage any of your DevOps processes, like release management, cloud load testing, work item management, App Insights seamlessly connects with that. So you identify a bug in App Insights, you can click a button to file it as a work item in your VSTS account. Now, when we talk about support, Application Insights supports a wide variety of languages, frameworks, platforms, ecosystems that are out there. Almost all of our SDKs and platforms are open sourced on GitHub. So if you do not find one of your favorite technologies right here, I would really recommend you to go to GitHub, open our open source SDKs, and really contribute to the community with providing your own abstraction layer on top of that. But I'm sure I am covering at least 90–95% of the popular platforms and frameworks out here, including some newer support announcements around Azure Functions that you would have seen on day one. There are support for Service Fabric, Kubernetes, .NET Core, some ETW enhancements, and so on. So that brings us to the demo. And I'm sure all of you guys are now excited enough to see how this all works in action. So what we'll be doing today, we have a real-life customer support kind of a retail application, which we have deployed parallelly on 2 different instances. There is a deployment on an Azure Windows VM, as well as a parallel deployment as an Azure App Service. Now, while that application has been running for some time, we have been getting certain comments from our customers saying these pages are slow, or some buttons are not working properly, it's crashing. There had even been some comments from our non-US customers saying their data is not being input properly. So there are some issues happening that we don't have very great grasp on. Let's see if Application Insights can help us. So we'll go through this entire journey with you guys, and at the end, if you see any specific areas you want to drill down deeper on, we can, of course, touch base on that again. Evgeny, all yours.
Cool, thank you. So let's switch over to the demo machine here. Before I start talking about the dashboard, we were fumbling around with PowerPoint a little bit at the beginning, and I was having a deja vu moment because I was up here on this stage, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, whenever this was still tech ready back in Houston. And leading up to my demo, I get a call from my engineers, and they go, dude, this isn't good. Our things are broken. There's exceptions happening. Things are just crashing, and I need to be up on the stage to present. And so, I was worried. And back then, we didn't have Application Insights. So I want to kind of go through a typical troubleshooting process with you today to show you how back then my engineers could have just solved the issue in a few minutes instead of calling me and making me shake with angst. So here we are on an Azure dashboard. Hopefully all of you are kind of familiar with the Azure portal a little bit and kind of know how this works. But this is a dashboard that we've put together for this app that Rahul described. And we can see a bunch of things over here, from my availability test result to an overview of what's going on with my application, to the application map, etc. We'll go through all of these things in a moment. But this is a typical dashboard that you or any other customer of ours would set up. And in fact, we have set up ourselves because Application Insights is monitored by Application Insights. And this is an overview. You can come in here. You can at a glance see the things that matter to you. I'll show you how to build some of these components in a few minutes. But I want to start with the application map over here. The application map is a great starting point because it provides me a nice graphical overview of everything that's going on with my system right now. So Rahul mentioned that we have the application hosted in a VM up in IaaS, and it's also hosted in App Services. And we can see that I have both of these applications here. Now, if they were, let's actually zoom in a little bit for you so you can see. If they were actually talking to each other, you would see the communication channel between them through that arrow. In this case, they're just parallel tiers, so there's no communication going on between them. So if we think about an application, typically the way that an application works is you've got people hitting the application. Those are your actual requests. They can be either synthetic through your monitoring, right? You want to make sure the application is up and running. That's your synthetic tests. And you've got real customer traffic coming in. And on the other side, you have dependencies that your application relies on. This can be queues, blobs, other APIs, all sorts of other things that your application is dependent on. For that matter, other applications, like I said. So let's take a look at how all of that's represented on this map. So in the middle, like I mentioned, we have our 2 applications. And you can see for each tier how many requests are coming through, the average latency, and the failure rates, the typical things that we want to look at. And for this other one, we've got 83% failures, and that's not good at all. So let's take a look at what traffic is coming into the application. We have, first of all, our availability tests. In this case, they're not passing at all. They're passing with 0%. We only have 1 test running here. Now, Application Insights supports testing of two varieties. One is a basic ping test. So you provide an endpoint, and it just pings it every now and then. We're distributed across, what, 16 geos?
16 global locations, yeah.
16 locations at this point that you can configure. This is all out of the box and included. There's also a premium feature that you can add, which is multi-step web tests, which if you use Visual Studio and .NET today to code, you probably already have those to test your web app anyway. And both of those are available to you from those 16 geographies. So we can see in this case, we have 2 tests passing and 1 not passing at all. And we can see the response rates as well. We can also see real customer traffic coming through. So this client over here, we had 29,000 page views. And by the way, you can also change the time range. Right now, we're only looking at the last 24 hours, but you can go up to 90 days. Application Insights right now, everything is 90 days across the board included with just your basic subscription. OK, so now we know the traffic coming in. We know where our potential gaps might be. Let's look at what's happening on the other end with our dependencies. For this particular application, we can see that we had 95 calls to this API that, in this case, happens to be hosted on Azure, but can be anywhere. It's not instrumented, and so we don't see details for it. But we know that we called out to it. We know that we had some SQL instances that we were talking to, which were failing with 4.5%, which, given that we have 85% or 84% failure, maybe that's not that big a deal. And I can also drill down and start looking in the individual SQL instances. With SQL in particular, as well as a few other Azure services, because these are Azure services, we actually plug deeper in. So for example, over here, and I won't click it, but the SQL instance itself is telling me I have some recommendations for you. And these are things like, for example, maybe you should create a new index, or maybe something is broken. So I can drill in and start querying things right there. I can also see that there's a few failures that are at the warning level, and I can configure my levels. So I can, at a very visual glance, see exactly what's going on. We also have issues with blob. You can see that that's exceeded my 20% limit there. We have a queue, we have a table, and we have yet another API call. So this is a great way for me to start debugging. Let's do that. I can actually click on any one of these tiers. I'll start with the application itself. And on the right here, I'll get an overview by operation of my top failures. So you can see that by far the biggest thing that's happening is a 409. But that may be a dependency. I want to investigate my own application right now. And the thing that jumps out at me is the system format exception .valid zip code. This is concerning because this is probably within my registration process or somewhere where the customer is trying to interact with me by providing the zip code. So if I can't get customers on board, that is not a good deal. So I'll press on that. And as soon as I press on it, it takes me to some representative data. So we actually collect, unless you have telemetry or sampling turned on, and we have sampling of a few different varieties. But every single request, every single exception, will track all the raw data. And so here we see just 100 instances of when we hit this format exception. We can see some information about the client that actually hit this exception. So you can see the method, exact method where they failed. They were calling us from this IP in San Jose in California. It was a PC. I can also expand all the properties and see some additional details. I can see the session ID, so I can look at everything that the user did in this session. I can see which role instance they came through. So if you have a multi-tiered app, or maybe something like app services where you scale up, scale down, you can see the exact role instance that was affected. If you want to do transaction tracing, we've got full support for Operation ID, Parent ID, which is sort of the .NET way of doing transaction tracing, as well as support for open tracing, Zipkin if you're familiar with that, et cetera, et cetera. You can see that this was actually synthetic traffic. So this was Application Insights synthetic traffic. It would look exactly the same for real traffic. So we can start drilling into the type of user that actually is hitting this exception. We also have available to us with a simple click a few common debugging operations that people would typically take when they hit exceptions like that. So for example, maybe I want to see all the telemetry for this operation, or all the telemetry for this session, or 5 minutes before and after. I can also take a look at the timeline for this session, and it will pop up here in a second. This wasn't a very interesting one because this user only hit the one exception. But if maybe they browsed to one page and then clicked a button and then hit an exception and maybe generated a trace, you also have this nice little timeline view over here that would show you exactly what happened. As we keep going down, we also see the full stack trace over here. And I can limit this to just my code, or I can see the entire stack trace, including maybe some libraries that I used. Now, sometimes what you'll encounter up here is a snapshot button.
And yeah, so
go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just mentioning, so the snapshots are not collected every time that an exception occurs, just to save your performance impact on your application. So collecting of snapshots is completely configurable within your code when you have that application insights config file. So you can decide how many snapshots per exception you want to collect based on your particular scenarios. So in this case, what we have said, every time an exception has hit at least 5 times, only then collect a snapshot, and only then for just a couple of times. So I don't want to store hundreds of MBs of dump file for each of the thousands of exceptions I'm collecting.
Yeah, so let's talk about what snapshots are, right? Because fine, we can configure them. But snapshots are a really, really cool feature, and this is exclusive to Azure. What happens essentially is as you host your service up and app services, because this is cloud scale computing, because we have all of this compute power up there, we can actually spin off a duplicate process, capture errors as they happen real time, as opposed to you having to pull all the data and try to replicate it on premise. And they'll capture, for every step in your stack, the entire set of locals. And so instead of having to do F8 and click through and all that on your local instance, you can see exactly what happened in your real exceptions that are being generated. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So here's, again, my entire stack trace. You can see everything from down to my MVC controller, to the start page, to the actual function that failed, to even the system string to number conversion here. And for every step in the process, I see all my locals. I see exactly how they propagate and the values for them. And so now, just looking at this, I can start getting insights and I can start troubleshooting. Now, I happen to know that the error happened over here. If you guys remember, we had the local callout as to the method that failed. And I can see 2 locals over here, N2H1 for zip and zip code and the exception that was generated. You know what, though? I kind of want to see what this is related to in the code. What is this function? So you can actually download this snapshot. And if you have Visual Studio hooked up, you can start exploring this from right within Visual Studio. So let's go to Visual Studio and see what that looks like. I've actually pre-downloaded the file. It's a couple of 100 megs. I don't want to deal with the Wi-Fi. But this is what you get when you open that file up. You can select whether you want to look at just the managed code, mixed, or native only. We'll go managed only because I don't really need to drill down into the framework level stuff. And as soon as I do this, notice this is very, very similar to what a typical debug or exception capture happens or looks like when you're just doing a local debug session. You can see we've got the stop button here for stop debugging. I can continue. And it takes me right to the code here and shows me here's that in32 parse function in the valid zip code function that happened. I can do the normal thing. I can hover over a particular variable and see its value. I can also come in here and actually add new calculated values, do the typical thing that Visual Studio lets me do. And I can here as well jump through the stack, and because I only looked at the managed code, it didn't capture that. But I can do everything that Visual Studio lets me do with a typical debug session with data that was captured off a real exception in the cloud. So incredibly powerful stuff. In this particular case, just to kind of solve the mystery, turns out what's happening is that someone's passing this string zip code in, which I believe is a Canadian zip code, whereas we only coded this for American zip codes, which are numeral only. And so it's trying to parse a string into integers and, of course, failing. And so with just a couple of clicks, I can go from knowing that I have an exception in production to knowing my locals, to being able to pull it right back into Visual Studio, troubleshoot within the context of the code, and being able to push a fix out really quick. So we can stop this and get back into Application Insights. So this is a really, really cool experience. Let's, what's up?
Yeah, so one thing I was just mentioning, Evgeny. So I'm sure many of you guys might not be directly going to Visual Studio or fixing these issues. If you are more on the support side or DevOps or Ops side, you detect this issue, you identify or triage that, yes, this is a reasonable thing to fix. You might not fix it yourself, so you can always file that as a work item if you have your Visual Studio Team Services or GitHub account integrated, and that would take it as a bug, put all the information within, so when the developer actually goes through their bugs, they can open that and come to App Insights and start fixing it.
Yeah, so what Raul's talking about is if I open up this sample snapshot here again, you can see there's a new work item button right there. I can hook up, like Raul mentioned, my GitHub account or my Visual Studio account and actually integrate with that. OK, let's keep going. So now we've solved that issue, but I'm worried about what else might be going on with the system. So let's look at other failures that are going on. And for that, I'm actually going to switch to the dedicated failures experience over here. By the way, you notice the little preview in brackets there? Something we've added recently to Application Insights is this preview blade. And if you want to start trying features before they're available broadly, just click here and choose which features you want to opt into or out of. So here we are in the failures blade, and you can see that we break this down by operations, dependencies, and exceptions, the typical things that you look at when you're investigating failures. And for each one of those, I see the failure rate. And you can see that there's a few more failures here than normally. So maybe I want to zoom in, so I can just drag my cursor there and zoom into that particular time range. And I can also correlate this with some metric that might be relevant to me. So maybe I want to look at the request count, or maybe I want to see if the CPU was spiking. And request count looks kind of interesting there, so I might want to look at that. I can filter down by the operation name. So here's all the different operations that customers are hitting. And I can see out of the 118 exceptions, 86 were hit on this get employees create. For each line of item, so I can select a different one, I can see what my top 3 response codes were, top 3 exceptions, top 3 dependencies. So again, the typical things that you would need for your investigation. And just as before, I can click through and see representative sample telemetry for each one of these. So here, this is kind of interesting. Someone was trying to get a font file and actually hit a 404. So perhaps we didn't upload the font file, or maybe there's a newer version or something we have to fix here. So this is kind of your typical failure experience. Very powerful stuff. You'll also notice here, of course, please do provide the feedback. But there's also filtering capabilities for each of these. So maybe I only want to take a look at 404s, and I want to see it charted over here on my main graph. So how much of the entire set of failures are because of 404s? I can, of course, go back and disable that filter, and maybe I want to look at 500s instead. So notice also how responsive everything is. It's just a great way to sort of holistically examine all of your failures and where to even start trying to fix your app, so that whole detect, triage, diagnose thing. Likewise, we have another view of your data, which is performance. So exceptions are typically caused either by bad code or because maybe there's a performance issue. And of course, performance is very valuable to our users, making sure that their app is running quick. So very similar experience. I can, again, zoom into a particular section here and see exactly what's going on. I can reset that. I can correlate it with a particular metric. So for performance, something like memory or storage or CPU might be a lot more relevant to see if maybe there's some rogue process on the machine that's killing everything. I can look at this by operation or by dependency. And I also have a histogram over here, which shows me the distribution of performance. So not just my 50th percentile, but my 90th, 99th, etc. And I can also pick that over here in case I want to look at not just the average experience, but the outlier, the really bad experiences. So let's look at the 99th here. And maybe I want to see what's happening around this peak here. One interesting thing to point out here is this insights section that's available to you in the performance side. What we're doing here is we're actually running a bunch of machine learning algorithms, and we're trying to come up with big clusters of data that might be relevant to explaining as to why we're hitting this performance issue. So now that I've zoomed in on what I think my peak of bad performance is, I can look at this and I can see that for 81% of all the telemetry that I had selected over all these other filters, what was common is that the result code was always 200, but everything was coming from the same role instance. So maybe now I know that there is a problem with that particular machine that I need to go and fix. So this type of experience is going to be rolling out more and more within Application Insights. There's such a wealth of data, and we want to try and make it very actionable for you. So you'll see these insights type of experiences more and more coming through. Now, you'll notice down here, I can look at the sample data. So just like in the exceptions, I can look at the raw telemetry and see the requests and dependency calls and actually figure out what's going wrong. But you'll also notice this button that says Profiler Traces. Let's click on that and see what happens. So there's another tool available to you as part of the Visual Studio ecosystem and in Application Insights called the Profiler. And what it does by default is it runs 2 minutes every hour, and it captures sample requests, sample dependency calls in different performance buckets compared to your average. So you can see we have sort of our typical under 75th percentile, but we also have 95th and 99th percentile. And maybe I want to see what's going on here. So right away, just like in the performance blade, we can also see that we have a performance tip. We right away know that 60% of this request was spent waiting on the CPU. So maybe I've got some threading issues right away I know I need to look at. I can also press the Show Me button here, and we'll actually take you to MSDN if there's a relevant article available that might help you resolve this issue. But we can see the entire stack over here, exactly where the time was spent, right down to the CPU time being blocked. I can show the hot path, so sort of the critical thing that took the longest, or I can actually drill into any one of these other nodes and see exactly how long it took. I can also look at not just my code, but also the framework dependencies. So if I want to get really, really deep into my code, I can also press that. It'll take, of course, a little bit longer to decompress now because we're looking at absolutely everything, almost down to native code, right? And I'll have the exact same experience. Now, just like with the snapshot debugger, you also have the ability to pull this ETL trace, which is what it is really behind the scenes. You can download it, and you can again examine it in Visual Studio if I press this button. Now, for the sake of time, because we do have a lot to get through, I won't do that today. But you can see, I mean, we're getting down into the WOW64 level and T delay. So you're getting into, you know, really deep level OS stuff for really difficult performance problems. So another awesome option available for you to troubleshoot as far as performance issues go. So we talked about exceptions, we talked about failures, we talked about Snapshot Debugger, the Performance Profiler. Let's see a few other options available to us. The one thing I wanted to show you is this View and Analytics button that you might have seen in other places in the tool so far. And it's kind of always represented by this little square icon, whatever you want to call it. So even though we present these fantastic views for you to try and let you sort of with the visual experience with just a few clicks to get to the root cause, sometimes you have some custom data that you need to analyze, or maybe you need to ask a question that our UI just isn't answering for you. For that, we actually expose a really, really powerful data platform for you, where you can come in, you can write custom queries, and you can actually interact with your data in its raw format. So I can select sort of what I want to use as a starting point in case I don't know the query language, in case I just want to kind of maybe build on an existing starting point. I can press that right there, and it'll actually show me the very query that was used to generate that graphic. Right? So everything you saw so far, there's no caching layers, there's nothing. As soon as the data arrives in Application Insights, which is typically, let's say, 2 to 5 minutes around there, you have it available for you to query in its raw format, and that's exactly what the UI is doing. So we can take a look at this query and try to decompose it. We are defining the start time and end time as variables. We're looking at this in a 5-minute grain. We're looking at the requests time period, where the time range is between the start and the end. And then we're just getting the 99th percentile, which is exactly what we were looking at before. So let's look a little bit more at the types of queries that you can run here. I'll actually open up a saved query that I had. You have a full saved query experience for you. But I'll pull up this Ignite 2017 one. Before I start clicking through these and actually showing you some more advanced queries in action, I want to show you the authoring experience. So, it might seem like it's a new language, it's intimidating, I have to learn yet another thing, but really it's quite simple. IntelliSense is prevalent throughout the tool, and so what you can do is you can start typing in a data source. I want to look at exceptions. So I'll start typing in exceptions. IntelliSense pops up and says, hey, you probably want to do exceptions. So yeah, I'll tab lock that in. The language is a pipe-through type of language. So unlike, let's say, SQL, where you have to really think about the entire query that you want to run all at the beginning, you can sort of keep transforming your data set and building on it. So maybe I want to look at just a data set in its raw format. Then maybe I want to filter it down to just a particular type of error. Then maybe I want to aggregate by that. And so I can just keep adding these clauses on. So if you're familiar with PowerShell or Bash or really any type of pipe-through language, you'll be familiar with why this is such a powerful construct. But anyway, so now it's saying, so now you have the exceptions table. Here's all the different things you can do with it. And right in line, you've got this little I button that you can press, and you can get some info right in line. Now, I'll show you the full documentation experience in a second, but this already is a very helpful thing for me. So maybe let's do take, which just returns a particular number of random rows, and maybe I want to see just 15 rows. So let's zoom out. It'll take just a second to bring the data back. And you see here is the raw data for just 15 exceptions. I can press this little chevron icon next to every row, and I can actually look at the data in a more expanded format. Now, the other really cool thing about Application Insights and analytics in particular is that every type of telemetry you can annotate with custom dimensions. So we collect a lot of things out of the box, right? The outer type, the outer message, for example, for exceptions, the method, the assembly, the IP, the country, all of these things. But sometimes you want to augment it with some custom data. And so you can attach custom data to absolutely any data type in Application Insights. It's just a dictionary of key value where the value can be string or integer or whatever you want. And JSON, which is how this gets passed through to analytics, is a first-class citizen. So I can just use the dot notation. So I can go exceptions, custom dimensions dot, role instance, or whatever my custom dimension might be. Really easy to interact with it, and I'll actually show you an example in a minute. But we can see everything that we know about our exceptions. So let's only look at critical exceptions. This is actually that JSON blob. So there's a thing in here called details, which is that stack trace and everything else that we saw in the troubleshooting experience. And it's actually an array. So maybe there's multiple exceptions being thrown. In this case, there's just one, so I'll expand row 0. You can see the parsed stack in here. I can keep drilling down. But I really only want to pull out the severity level. And I want to only look at the critical ones of those. And let's just bring back 10 of those. So query language should be pretty straightforward to you at this point. Now, I can see that most of these seem to be the format exception error types. But let's just confirm that that's indeed the case. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to summarize, and I'm going to do a count by the type column. So let's go ahead and run that. And I can see that even though format exception is prevalent, I actually had 4 instances of a couple of other critical exceptions there. So, some people prefer doing this. I can pull that query together in 2, 3 minutes, 10 seconds, depending on how familiar I am with the whole experience. And maybe I don't want to deal with the UI. Maybe I just want to come in and get right down to what I know is the issue. So let's say that we knew that this format exception problem was the issue that we're investigating. Let's filter down to just that. So now we are only looking at the format exception. And now let's see how this trends over time. Right? So how many of these exceptions are we hitting in this case every minute over the last 24 hours? So I'll run that, and within a half a second, we've just analyzed a full day's worth of exception data, potentially millions of rows. The system, by the way, scales up to probably billions, tens of billions with no issues. And we can see that for every minute over the last 24 hours, what the count of these errors were. Now, something that's really cool also about analytics here is that you've got built-in charting. So sometimes, especially in cases like this where I need to visualize a trend, instead of pulling this out into Excel or the typical visualization thing that you go through, even within, say, SSMS, you can chart it right here. Press chart, and I can see that actually, it's a consistent 3 exceptions per minute. I can also switch to a different visualization type. I've got everything from area charts to pie charts to maybe line charts, where we can see that this is actually a demo app, and we're just generating exceptions on a regular basis. But this type of experience where visualizing some data right from within the app is very useful. I can also, once I have this, export it to Excel. If you do need to do some deeper analysis on it, I have an option to export this to Power BI. So I can start building Power BI dashboards, maybe correlated to some additional data I have in another data source. I can share a link directly to this query, do all sorts of things with this query to make it operationalized. One other thing I'll show you here, which is new for Ignite, which is something that a lot of you have been asking for who have been using this tool for a while, is the ability to look at the time in something that's not UTC. By default, we send all telemetry in UTC, but it's often useful to see it in local time or in maybe the customer's time zone. So for both charts and tables, we now have this display time dropdown where I can come in and I can say, you know what, no, let's look at it in a local time, or maybe my customer is in Hawaii, so I can pick that right there. Really, really useful. You have no idea how many people have been asking for this. You can also pick a favorite one. So if you come into the settings, under General over here, you can pick your default display time zone. By the way, color schemes you saw there as well. That's something relatively new that a lot of people have been wanting, but we haven't quite gotten to yet. OK, so let's keep going with our investigation. We're kind of at the point now where we've done some trending. We know what's going on. Let's look at some other telemetry. Right now, we've only kind of grouped things by one dimension, which was time. But I can actually start grouping this and pivoting and segmenting by multiple dimensions. In this case, I'm looking at the page views. And I'm just looking at the count by the OS in an hourly grain over the past 24 hours. And I can actually use a render operator to go directly to the chart. One other neat thing that you can do with charts is you can pin them right back to Azure Dashboard. So if you think back to where I started the demo, if this is a chart that I need to keep coming back to, and I want to look at this together with a few other charts, I can pin it right to one of my dashboards, and it'll show up for you. Let's actually take a look at it. If I go back to here, it'll show up over here. And you can see there's a few analytics pieces pinned already. So here's a request SLA over 8 days. And this is a custom query that I have behind there. And I can actually press the analytics button right here, be taken to the query. I can then start building on the query, maybe filtering down further, doing all sorts of things with it. But this is a great way to operationalize your queries as well. So let's get back to this. Let's actually look at that SLA query. I want to show you just a little bit more advanced stuff here. I'm not expecting you to actually learn the language out of this session. We have a ton of resources available for you, but just be familiar with some of the new constructs available. So let's say my application has a 99% SLA, which is pretty low. Typically, it's 99.9 these days, but let's say it's 99. So I'm actually calculating the SLA based on a custom metric. I'm specifying what an SLA met means for me, what an SLA breached means for me, etc. And then I'm also saying that my target SLA is 99, and I'm rendering a time chart. So let's see what that looks like. So here I can see my actual SLA, and the green line is my target SLA of 99. And in this case, this is probably OK. I don't see any breaches, so maybe I can just move on to the next thing of investigation. Let's look at it over 7 days. See if there's anything interesting, maybe longer term. And this is, by the way, again, my hourly SLA. And notice how quickly the data comes back. And again, no caching. These are all real-life queries over millions and millions of records. So now I can see that actually, maybe last week, I had some breaches that I might want to go and investigate further. Let's keep going through some other queries. Here is that same query, but actually over 3 months. The full 90 days that you have available to you. And again, notice the speed. And you can see that we had a really big issue right around here. What was that? Back in July. You also notice this little purple dot over here. And this is, again, our machine learning algorithms running behind the scenes and trying to identify interesting data points. In this case, it identified that we had this giant dip. Now, you might look at this and go, well, yeah, clearly that's a dip. Why do you need machine learning to even tell me that? But what you can actually do is click on that dot, and we'll run those same clustering algorithms that you saw earlier, and we'll try to tell you, why do we think this failure happened? So in this case, let's take a look at the chart first. You see the green line and the blue line. The green line represents all the data points without that pattern that we found. The blue line represents everything with just the pattern. And this is whatever metric you had defined. So in this case, this is the SLA. So for most calls, the SLA was right there at about 100. But with this pattern, it was clearly this blue dip. And so, OK, now I want to know what this dip is. What is this pattern that you found? And you can see it defined right there. It was all coming from a particular source app, this Deep Insights Ops int thing, on a particular SDK version. And you can see it's even pulling out these custom dimensions that I'm sending in myself that aren't collected by the SDK by default. So it's drilling down into my JSON, and it's pulling out all of these interesting things. But the thing that might concern me most here is that everything came from a particular deployment. And so this might tell me right away that there was a bad version of this thing deployed that I might need to go and address. So right away, I was able to go from a basic SLA query to knowing that my SLA was breached to, with one click, having a very good candidate for what potentially might be causing the issue. Definitely encourage you guys to play around with this more. And by the way, all of these algorithms that I'm talking about, the clustering algorithms and everything, they're also available for you in the query language itself. So if you want to actually maybe see what other potential patterns we had, I can go to the beginning of the line. Let's just get rid of the chart here. And I'll go off the cuff. I'll say evaluate autocluster v2, which is actually one of the algorithms in there. And you can see that there isn't anything too interesting, but mostly because I'm not specifying all dimensions. So let's do that. So nothing too interesting here. But in general, all of these algorithms are also available for you to use in the raw format. Now, I want to show you another feature that's relatively new that, again, we've been getting a lot of requests for. Let's say that now I know the SLA, but maybe I have a seasonality to my traffic pattern. Maybe, on Mondays, people come to my website a lot more than they do on the weekend. Maybe, everyone starts working, and now they need to go watch some videos on my website or something. So I want to see how my data compares day over day, Monday compared to a Monday, Tuesday compared to a Tuesday, that sort of thing. Essentially, a moving time range, as opposed to just seeing the entire thing. So something we've added is the ability to reference previous and next rows. So these are almost like windowing functions in SQL, if you're familiar with them. So let's just take a look at the raw data here, and I'll walk you exactly through what happens. So again, I've got 90 days worth of data here. This is, again, my SLA. And you can see that for every day, I have my SLA. Now, I want to go back 7 days. I want to see what the SLA was on the same day of the week, but a week prior. So what I'll actually do is I'll use this previous function to do that. I'm going to extend a new column called previous week, and I'm going to say, look at this %SLA index, go back 7 rows, and if you don't actually have a value there, because of course, for the first 6 rows, you're not going to have a previous value, use the default of 99.9. So let's say we're very optimistic, and if we don't know the SLA, we're assuming we're perfect. So let's run that. And now we actually get the results. So you can see that for this particular value here, if we go back 7 rows, there's that 99.83. And here's 7.3, 7.6, there's that 7.6 again. So now we've pulled that out. And because the query language here is so powerful, this extended column that I just created, I can keep interacting with it. And I can actually do a calculation that says, take the delta between the current column and the column 7 days ago, which you can see right there. So now I can start doing my analysis. I'll show you another thing that we've introduced here at Ignite that, again, this is, I think, the second most requested thing on user voice that we had, which is the ability to do joins across multiple instances of Application Insights. So previously, all of this querying, all of this power was only available to you within the context of just the one application you were looking at. And we always kept getting questions about, I have, maybe multiple tiers, or maybe I have my application geographically distributed. Do I monitor each one in a separate instance of Application Insights, or do I split it up? And so what we can do now is say, you guys pick. It doesn't really matter. You can do joins across both of these. So I'll just show you really briefly. I actually have another instance of this application called FabricM Exemplify. And if I run this query right now, what you'll see is I'm doing a join, and I'm saying app FabricM exemplifies, so I'm doing sort of a fully qualified thing here. And now I'm actually looking at the SLA for my current application production, for my pre-production, and my SLA level. So now I can expand this to many, many more applications and actually look at my system holistically. I'll really briefly show you the documentation experience because we are starting to run out of time and I want to make sure we show you all the other cool features available. But if you want to learn more about the query language, we've spun up a new documentation site here for you, and you can access it by pressing this little documentation button over here. And you've got everything from basic getting started tutorials. If you're coming in from SQL, we also have cheat sheets available for you, right? From SQL, from Elastic, from other common things. So a full set of reference. If I wanted to learn more about the summarize operator, I can type in summarize, and it'll show everything with summarize in it, and I can go back and, just like MSD, and see everything available to me. So very much encourage you guys to play around with this. The last thing that we'll do before we switch back into the portal is go back and look at these critical exceptions. And what happens with exceptions and with really any metric that you can come up with here is that you typically want to operationalize it and start alerting on it. And this is actually the top requested feature that we had in User Voice for Application Insights, the ability to alert on custom metrics.
So we are addressing your top 2 requests today in analytics. So
yeah. So let's take a look at what that looks like. I'll get back into Application Insights. This is currently in private preview. We'll actually flash the link on the screen in a few minutes here if you want to sign up and if you want to try this out. But I'll show you what it looks like. If I come down to alerts in Application Insights, or from Azure Monitor for that matter, because we are part of the broader Azure monitoring system, I can press this new button that you get if you sign up for the private preview that says Add Log Search Alert. And when I do that, I get this new screen that says, let's look at the last 15 minutes. Let's run the query every 15 minutes. In this case, we're only going to look at the number of results. We can pick our threshold, and we can pick what's called an action group, which is really the types of actions that you want to take. And you can do email, SMS, webhook, connection into your ITSM provider. So if I know a lot of you have something like, say, ServiceNow, you can hook right into that and have two-way correlation between the two. But the really important piece here is this text box that says search query. And if I paste that there, and if I create this alert, I'll now get an alert every time this metric is exceeded given my criteria that I defined. So this is really alerting over your queries now. So hopefully a lot of you will sign up for this, give us feedback. Like I said, this has been the top request that we've had in Application Insights. So we'd love to hear what you guys think about it. So OK, now let's say we've gone through all this. We've resolved all of our performance issues, all of our exceptions. Now we actually want to start building new features. We want to do some reporting. We want to look at some business metrics. And for that, I'll hand it over to Rahul, who will show you some of that.
Thanks, Evgeny. So what we just saw in the last 30 minutes was something that happened wrong. How quickly were we able to identify that, root cause it, and essentially go ahead and fix that issue. Now, while that was a reactive analysis, there are situations where you want to figure out what's going on in real time. And for that matter, we have a live metric stream, which gives you real-time metrics for your application. So here is my live metric stream I'm opening.
Yeah, so this is really cool if, let's say, we found an exception and we had a fix in mind. We deployed it, and we wanted to see right away, sort of in a second or two latency, exactly what's going on, whether it's fixed the issue or not.
So essentially, if I had more time, if I open the website on a parallel tab, I click on a few buttons, in essentially a second or sub-second, I would see those being impacted on the real-time view here. So by default, I'm getting all my request data, my dependency data, even my performance counters like memory, CPU, exception rates, and so on. Now, while these are what you get by default, if you click on the filter button here, you can actually choose any custom event, custom performance counter, custom trace, custom request that you are collecting from your own. And you can pin that on the live metric stream dashboard and see that in real time. And not only that, let me zoom it a bit. So not only your key KPIs, on the right-hand side, you can see all of your raw telemetry in real time. So if I click on a particular exception, if I go down, I can see the full stack of that exception in real time, including the basic details like what the instance was, what the message, what the rough call stack was. Now, while this is not designed to give you a full diagnostics experience, the idea here is in a real-time kind of a dashboard, you identify something unexpected going on. And from that point onwards, jump onto the experiences Yevgeny showed a few minutes back around how to debug your performance and diagnostic issues. So that's the real-time view. There are various cases where you want to get certain other metrics that what we have been providing to you by default. So if you go to Azure Monitor, you can now create multidimensional metrics and visualize them and pin them on Azure portal. Again, that's been one of our top 10 user voice asks as well, so we are really hitting the ground today. So if you go to the new preview of Metrics Explorer, zoom it a bit more. So in the new preview of Metrics Explorer, essentially you can pick and choose any application insights metric, or for that matter, any metric that you are collecting from your Azure IaaS, PaaS, SaaS services. So everything that comes into Azure Monitor, you can visualize that using the new metrics experience. And when I say it's multidimensional, let me show what I mean. So I'm choosing my Fabricam resource that we had been working on. One sec. Okay, I chose my Fabricam resource. I am choosing the metric that I'm interested in. In this case, I want to look at my sessions. So I'm getting all the sessions that in the last 24 hours, number of sessions that happened. I want to do a multidimensional metric, so I can add grouping. And I want to group this based on city. So I can actually, on this one particular chart, segment and group my particular metric using my city. I can even add filtering as I want. I can even add other charts. For example, I want to look at my request response time. And on that same chart, I want to plug in a metric from my storage, seeing how my dependencies are working. So I can create all these sorts of creative charts and visualize them on the Azure dashboard. While we are on Azure Monitor, one interesting thing that we additionally announced at Ignite is the new unified overview. So if you're using Application Insights, if you're also using our infrastructure telemetry like log analytics, all your alerts coming in from both your apps and infra can come together on this one unified view of the dashboard. So if I select my subscription, where my app and infra are both running, on this one single page, I can see all the alerts that had been fired. So just takes a few seconds to load. Okay, it's taking its own sweet time, but essentially you will be getting all the alerts that you are capturing from Application Insights. And from this page onwards, you can click on that Application Insights button, jump onto that particular resource you want to drill down deeper, and click and jump to your App Insights component for further analysis. Now, this is your Azure Monitor view. There are various experiences where I talked about taking actions, automated actions on top of your data. So while we were in Azure Monitor, there are few capabilities around there called auto-scaling. So whatever metrics that we talked about, you can set up an auto-scaling system where you specify, let's say I have a custom metric, say my server performance or server response time. When it grows by more than 1 second, I want to add another instance of my app service. So these kinds of automated operations I can easily set up. I can even integrate it with my Logic apps or Microsoft Flow apps and set up some automated reporting. So I have one example here where I have an Azure Logic app running. And what it essentially does is every morning, it has an analytics query which runs a machine learning algorithm identifying interesting clusters of exceptions that happened the last day. And every morning I get that email from the automated reporting. So this is just kind of a basic example where I have this particular machine learning query. You remember AutoCluster from Evgeny's demo. So this query runs every 24 hours. I have set up that 1-day recurrence, and I have set up my Outlook email template, so I get that email every morning. So this is a basic experience, but I can even create like proper automated reporting. If you want to send some kinds of reports to your leadership or executives, you can actually build your automation around this. Now, all of these experiences we saw were more oriented towards our engineering teams, developers, DevOps. let me take you through a few minutes of experience on how to understand who your users are, where are they coming from, and how you can identify user retention, user engagement, your user flows, and so on. So what we'll do is we'll go back to our Application Insights resource. And you'll notice here that there is a new usage tab here. If you have been using App Insights in the last few months, it's no longer new for you, but it's still in public preview. So we have been adding more and more new features around here. So the first one here is our user timeline or user monitoring, where you'll see a kind of a basic timeline of your usage over the last 24-hour period, which you can configure. On the right-hand side, I can see, again, those contextual machine learning-powered insights. I can see actual raw samples of these users. So I can click on a particular sample and see what this anonymous user actually did with our website across multiple sessions, multiple events, and so on. I'm seeing some basic cohorts here below, like I can split my user data by custom events, page views, country, region, and so on. If I click on country and region, if I go back, I can actually see that my data is coming in from various different countries, and there is a nice wavy pattern. The first time I saw this pattern, I was really curious on what that is. But if I look at the data in detail, what that basically shows me is that according to the time period of that particular geography, that's where people are coming into my website, and that's what creating that nice wavy pattern, and the colors are increasing and decreasing. So looks pretty cool. Same user timeline, user monitoring experience you get from sessions, your custom events, if you are sending any custom instrumentation. But the interesting thing is funnels data. Now, all these custom events or usage or page views that you are getting, you can now create funnels on top of that, which basically means, in this example, out of all the 100% people who are coming onto my homepage, how many are actually going to the customers page and creating a new customer account for themselves? So these kinds of drop-off scenarios I can actually work out with my real user monitoring data and identify where in that stack I need to focus my maybe marketing efforts or development efforts more on. If I look at customer retention, that's another key thing that when we do our business reviews or service reviews, that's one thing especially at App Insights we definitely look at. So whenever there is a new feature that we are working on, our key metric is, will it impact my customer retention and engagement? And this is exactly the view that helps us figure that out. So I can filter on any particular event and say that people who came to my application, 100% of them came back within the week, 73% of them came after a week, and then all of them dropped out. So now I know on a feature-by-feature basis, a week-by-week basis, which of my features get me most retention and engagement, what do I want to prioritize, and so on. Similarly, I have a new feature called User Flows that we just announced a couple of weeks back. And what User Flows does is essentially gives you a timeline view of a particular flow or journey across your application. So let me choose a more interesting example here. Let me choose people who come to my homepage. So enter my application. What do they do next? So I create the graph. So that's the graph I see here. So starting with people who enter my homepage, they do various other things. So either they directly go to creating a ticket reference, or they create a new ticket button, or I'm seeing this interesting pattern. So people are coming on homepage, again going to homepage, again going to homepage, and so on. What that means is people are refreshing that homepage again and again. And as a program manager, I might want to implement an auto-refresh capability to make the life of my customers easier. So this way, I can identify some interesting patterns, some interesting flows that I can eventually optimize further.
Yeah, something really cool to point out here is that all of this that Raul is showing you, it's already available to all of you who raised your hands for whether you're using Application Insights. If you have page views data coming in, or if you have custom event data coming in, these views are already available with all the same instrumentation, nothing additional needed.
And to get started, as I mentioned before, it's extremely easy. I'm just showing you a Visual Studio experience. So if you're here, you right-click on your project, and you'll see Application Insights. So while this is already configured, if it was not, you'll see Add Application Insights button here. Click on that. It will do everything for you. The only thing you will want to do later is add any custom instrumentation if you need. So that takes care of most of the things. Even if not Visual Studio, we do have SDKs and NuGet packages and other things available for all the other platforms we saw in the slide before at support. So with this, let's get back to the last 5 minutes of our presentation and take you through some roadmap kind of pieces. So just a quick recap. So we took you through health check, optimizations, analytics, actions, customer insights, getting started, and so on. While this is a text-heavy slide, or going to be a text-heavy slide, I won't spend more time on it, but just a good reference for you to look at later on. So we had metrics and dashboards. We briefly touched on synthetic monitoring. We have real-time live metric stream. There are machine learning-powered smart detections. So these alerts that we created manually, smart detection automatically identifies some anomalies and sends alerts on that. We had a look at the new application map, profiling and debugging experiences, and in Visual Studio, how you can get all these metrics while you are coding. We went through the new queries in analytics portal, as well as some machine learning-powered experiences that we have built. On the alerting side, all these alerts you can send through emails, webhooks, ITSM, and so on. And if you're using the Azure mobile app, all of these come there as well. And of course, we have auto-scaling available within all your Azure monitoring capabilities. Plus, we have integrations with Flow and Logic apps for automating your reporting and processing. On the customer insights, we have user session event monitoring, funnels, retention, flows that we looked at everything. On getting started, you have Visual Studio that you can get started with, status monitor we talked about, and the extensions on app services and VMs. So with that, just a recap of the announcements that we have made this week at Ignite. So that's the new Azure Unified Overview that we brought, the new metrics exploration experience, the new UX for monitoring and diagnostics with the machine learning insights, the cross-resource querying that Evgeny showed, the new integration with Mobile Center. That thing I didn't touch upon before. So if you have iOS and Android apps, you can now connect it with Application Insights via Mobile Center and run all the rich querying and usage analytics on top of your client applications. And this is the link for the log-based alerting. That's a private preview. You might want to just click on that and join if you want to explore that before it becomes available broadly. Something more that's available in the last few months, we are now part of a pay-as-you-go pricing model. So if you're using Azure pricing, it's part of that. If you're part of the OMS enterprise billing, you get App Insights as part of that. So it's completely flexible on how you are using the model. And one thing in the last couple of years, I have like day and day heard customers asking me for certifications. So we finally, a few months back, got all these various different certifications, which might alleviate some of the concerns you guys might have been having before. So in terms of where we are going next, the broad idea is these are our guiding principles around the entire Azure monitoring stack. So what we mean by holistic Azure monitoring is that across all of your Azure IaaS, PaaS, SaaS resources, we want to provide monitoring as a native experience. You don't want to do something specially manually to get everything configured. You will get your application data, platform data, infrastructure data at the point you are, and just make your life easier. When we say advanced analytics platform, we are basically continually building on top of the analytics experience that you just saw. You'll see more and more cross-resource, cross-application, cross-component querying, so that you can ask those questions where when the problem occurred in the app, did that have to do something with a noisy neighbor on the VM? So you can connect the full picture with the new analytics experience that we are building on. Scale and complexity. We understand all these large enterprise applications, modern scenarios. We have huge scale requirements, huge composite applications, one application calling another and another. So with the new composite topology views that are coming soon, as well as enhancements on adaptive scaling and so on, we really want to ensure that any of your scale and complexity requirements are actually covered with the tools that we provide. And lastly, value to business. Now, while all this is great, you are able to make your applications faster, gain user engagement and retention. Ultimately, what matters is how it impacts your business. So you will be seeing going forwards how your performance and usage telemetry impact your business metrics like cost or revenue or like business growth and so on. And that's something that we all really care about, and that's what you will get with Application Insights very soon. So with that, we end on a summary. So you can get started for free today. There is a free and paid tier. Both are available. So you can get started. We have all of our announcements on our blogs, on our roadmap. There are videos and recordings available for deeper topics that we discussed today in brief on Channel 9 that you guys can have a look at. And with that, any questions, both of us are here, and we can help you with any need. And yes, thanks, Evgeny. Do evaluate this session. This is really important and helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you all.